Imagine a black and yellow stock car screaming down the Daytona straightaway in 1967, absolutely shattering the speed records of stock car racing at an unbelievable 180 miles per hour. This is legacy engines, and I spend way too much time thinking about the wild, rule-bending genius of Smokey Yunick and his legendary 1967 Chevelle. If you are someone who loves vintage NASCAR, rule-breaking engineering, and deep dives into automotive history, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Look, if you have ever spent even 5 minutes around grease-stained mechanics or hardcore gearheads, you have heard the name Smokey Yunick whispered with a mixture of reverence, awe, and maybe a little bit of fear. He was not just a great mechanic. He was a master of the gray area, a man who saw a rule book not as a list of constraints, but as a collection of helpful suggestions. Now, you might be thinking, is that not just cheating? But to Smokey, it was something entirely different. He called it creative compliance. To understand how one man managed to make the entire NASCAR establishment look utterly foolish, we have to go back to the beginning. Henry Smokey Yunick was born in 1923 in Pennsylvania. He got his famous nickname doing something loud and dangerous. In his younger days, he rode a motorcycle that belched such a massive cloud of thick, black smoke that people simply started calling him Smokey. The name stuck, and honestly, it fit like a glove for a guy who would spend the rest of his life leaving his competitors in a cloud of dust and confusion. After flying bombers in World War II, a detail most people do not realize actually shaped his entire approach to engineering, Smokey decided to settle down in Daytona Beach, Florida. It was there that he opened his legendary shop, famously named the best damn garage in town. That was not just some cheap, self-promoting marketing gimmick. It was the absolute, stone-cold truth. If you wanted to go fast, that garage was your mecca. Smokey was an engine builder, a mechanic, and above all, a brilliant innovator. He did not think like other people. While his rivals were busy trying to squeeze a few extra horsepower out of their engines by polishing intake ports, Smokey was looking at the bigger picture. He was looking at physics, fluid dynamics, and the psychological weaknesses of inspectors. This is where it gets really interesting. Smokey's philosophy was simple. The best way to cheat is not to cheat at all, but to read the rules so closely that you find the gaps the writers never even knew existed. One of his most famous early stunts involved a fuel tank. NASCAR officials, suspicious of his car's incredible fuel mileage, actually confiscated his entire fuel tank during an inspection. They figured they had finally caught him red-handed. Smokey did not even flinch. He walked over to the car, fired up the engine, and drove the car right back to his garage without any fuel tank in it at all. He had hidden several gallons of fuel inside 2-inch-wide frame rails and incredibly long, coiled fuel lines. Technically, the fuel tank itself was completely stock. The rules said nothing about the size of the fuel lines. That was Smokey in a nutshell. But his magnum opus, the car that would cement his legacy as NASCAR's ultimate rule-bending genius, was the 1967 Chevrolet Chevelle. For decades, a myth has circulated around the racing world that Smokey actually built a 7/8 scale replica of a Chevelle. The story goes that he took a factory car, shrunk every single dimension by exactly 12.5%, and somehow snuck it past the inspectors. Now, you might be thinking, how on earth could anyone shrink a whole car and expect nobody to notice? Well, here is the thing, he did not actually shrink the car. That is a common misconception. What he actually did was far more clever, far more complex, and infinitely more difficult to detect. He took a full-size, factory-shipped Chevelle and completely re-engineered its outer shell to manipulate the air, without changing the dimensions that the primitive NASCAR templates of the era were designed to check. In late 1966, Chevrolet quietly shipped a stock Chevelle to Daytona. General Motors was technically participating in a self-imposed racing ban at the time, but they had a brilliant engineer named Herb Fischel who looked the other way while Smokey reimagined what a stock car could be. Using high-end aircraft tools he had mastered during his bomber pilot days, Smokey began to slice, dice, and reshape the heavy metal body of the Chevelle. He was fighting against a set of rules that were still incredibly primitive. Back then, NASCAR did not have the high-tech, laser-guided inspection stations they use today. Instead, they relied on visual inspections and a few basic metal templates that they would lay over specific parts of the car, like the hood or the roofline. If those specific points matched, the car was deemed legal. Smokey realized that if he only altered the areas between those templates, he could create a car that looked completely stock to the untrained eye, but performed like an absolute rocket ship on the high banks of Daytona. He started with the body width. He narrowed the entire body of the Chevelle by 1.5 inches. Think about that for a second. By pulling the sides of the car inward, he reduced the frontal area of the vehicle. It is a simple matter of physics. A narrower car has to push less air out of the way as it speeds down the track. Drag was thus reduced. To the naked eye, that 1.5-inch difference in width was just the beginning of the illusion. Let us talk about the roofline, because this is where Smokey's understanding of the rulebook became almost supernatural. He lowered the roof of the Chevelle by a full 2 inches. Now, you might be thinking, surely the inspectors would notice a chopped roof. It is one of the easiest modifications to spot on a stock car. But here is how Smokey bypassed their templates. He did not just chop the pillars and call it a day. Instead, he subtly reshaped the entire glass greenhouse of the car. He tilted the windshield back at a steeper angle and sloped the rear window down to create an incredibly sleek, aerodynamic profile that let the air slip over the top of the car with almost zero turbulence. To keep the inspectors from catching on, Smokey lowered the floor pan of the car. By dropping the floor, he kept the driver's seat in the exact same relative position to the roof. When an inspector looked inside, the driver did not look cramped, and the interior proportions looked perfectly normal. It was an incredibly sophisticated piece of structural engineering disguised as standard sheet metal. Then he turned his attention to the front and rear bumpers. On a standard, factory-floor 1967 Chevelle, there is a noticeable gap of about 1 inch or 2 between the chrome bumper and the body panels. At high speeds, these gaps act like tiny parachutes, scooping up air, creating immense drag, and causing front-end lift. Smokey solved this by tucking both the front and rear bumpers completely flush against the body. He literally molded the sheet metal to wrap around the bumpers, eliminating those air-catching pockets. The air did not get trapped, it just glided smoothly past. In the back of the car, Smokey worked even more magic. He angled the deck lid, which is the trunk lid, downward. By sloping the rear deck, he allowed the air to flow cleanly off the back of the car, reducing the low-pressure pocket of turbulent air that typically drags a stock car backward at high speed. To make it even sleeker, he actually shortened the deck lid by a fraction of 1 inch, reducing the rear surface area. It was a masterpiece of aerodynamic refinement, completed decades before teams started using multi-million-dollar wind tunnels and computational fluid dynamics. But here is what most people do not realize. Smokey did not just stop with the bodywork. He knew that the air flowing under the car was just as important as the air flowing over it. On a standard stock car of the era, the underside was a chaotic mess of frame rails, exhaust pipes, oil pans, and suspension linkages. This created massive turbulence, which literally tried to lift the car off the track at high speed. To fix this, Smokey fabricated a completely smooth, flat underbelly. He basically created an early version of a belly pan, wrapping the frame rails and smoothing out the floor to let the air pass underneath without any resistance. He also reshaped the wheel wells, drawing the metal tightly around the tires. Standard wheel wells are wide open, allowing air to swirl violently around the spinning wheels, creating drag and instability. By narrowing these openings, Smokey kept the air moving in a straight, undisturbed line. This not only made the car faster on the straightaways, but it also made it incredibly stable when cornering at high speed. Now, let us go beneath the skin because this is where it gets really interesting. While his competitors were obsessing over getting every single ounce of horsepower out of their big block V8 engines, Smokey was attacking the laws of physics from a completely different angle. He moved the entire engine 4 inches rearward in the chassis. Think about the brilliance of that move. He did not shorten the wheelbase of the car, which would have been an instant disqualification. Instead, he pushed the engine back within the frame. Why does this matter? Well, it all comes down to weight distribution. A standard front-engine car is nose-heavy, which makes it plow through the corners. By shifting that massive cast iron engine 4 inches closer to the center of the car, Smokey achieved a near-perfect 50-50 weight balance. The car did not fight the turns anymore, it rotated effortlessly. It gave his driver quicker corner exits, better tire wear, and an incredible amount of confidence. And then, of course, there were also the frame rails. The frame of a stock car is made of heavy steel tubes. Smokey realized that these hollow tubes were essentially wasted space. So, he acid-dipped the frame rails to make them lighter, and then sealed them off to act as secondary fuel reservoirs. Combined with the extra-large, thick fuel lines we talked about earlier, the car could carry significantly more fuel than the official 22-gallon tank limit allowed. To put this in perspective, imagine trying to run a marathon while carrying a heavy backpack, while your opponent is running with a lightweight hydration pack built into their suit. You might have the same lung capacity, but they are going to outlast and outpace you simply because they have distributed the weight smarter. Smokey was not just building a faster car, he was building a more efficient, more balanced weapon. He knew that races are not just won by brute force, they are won by minimizing waste, maximizing balance, and outthinking the rule book. And that is exactly what happened when he showed up at Daytona in 1967. The entire racing world was about to receive a massive wake-up call because Smokey's gray car was not just fast. It was completely revolutionary, leaving everyone to wonder what secrets were actually hidden inside this machine. When the black and yellow Chevelle rolled into the garage area at Daytona in February of 1967, the atmosphere immediately grew tense. Racing teams in those days were highly suspicious of each other, but when it came to Smokey, suspicion was replaced by outright paranoia. His reputation preceded him, and everyone knew that if Smokey was in the garage, some sort of mechanical wizardry was afoot. But nobody was prepared for what was about to happen on the high banks of the legendary track. Curtis Turner, a legendary driver known for his absolutely fearless driving style, was strapped into the driver's seat. Turner was a man who did not care about the technicalities of suspension geometry or weight distribution. He just wanted a car that could run like a bullet. And Smokey had given him exactly that. During qualifying, Turner took the Chevelle out and shattered the stock car racing world by hitting an unbelievable top speed of 180 miles per hour. To put that in perspective, this was faster than any NASCAR stock car had ever gone in the history of the sport. The paddock was thrown into absolute chaos. Only 12 Chevrolets had even managed to make the field for the race, and Turner's Chevelle was the only one that was anywhere near the top 27 positions. He did not just beat the competition, he completely embarrassed them. He outqualified the absolute giants of the sport, including Richard Petty in his powerful Plymouth, the powerhouse Ford teams of Holman Moody, and the factory-backed Dodges. Protests immediately poured into the NASCAR front office like a tidal wave. The rival team owners were absolutely furious. They demanded that NASCAR tear Smokey's car apart piece by piece until they found the illegal modifications that were obviously giving him such a massive advantage. And NASCAR complied. For an entire week, inspectors hovered over the Chevelle. They measured, they checked, they used their primitive metal templates, and they scrutinized every single weld, panel, and wire. But here is what most people do not realize. They found absolutely nothing illegal. Not a single thing. Bill France Sr. and his team of technical inspectors were utterly baffled. They knew the car was doing things a stock Chevelle should not be physically capable of doing, but because Smokey had designed every single modification to exist in the spaces between their rules, their hands were tied. Technically, according to the rule book of the time, the car was completely legal. However, when race day finally arrived, the story took a very different, dramatic turn. Curtis Turner was flying on the track, showcasing the incredible speed of the machine. He quickly made his way to the front, leading 6 glorious laps and proving to the massive crowd that Smokey's creation was indeed a marvel of engineering. But as the race went on, the car began to struggle with its handling. This is where it gets really interesting. While Smokey's aerodynamic modifications made the car incredibly fast in a straight line, they had also created some unexpected side effect. The highly customized suspension, which was designed to sit incredibly low during inspection and then rise slightly on the track to reduce drag, started behaving unpredictably under the immense aerodynamic loads of racing speed. Turner was fighting the steering wheel, trying to keep a car stable that was constantly shifting its ride height and balance. Despite the handling struggles, Turner kept pushing the car to its absolute limit. But on lap 143, tragedy struck. The legendary Chevrolet 427 mystery motor, which had been pushed far past its designed limits to maintain those insane speeds, finally let go. The engine detonated in a cloud of smoke and oil, bringing an abrupt, heartbreaking end to one of the most incredible runs in NASCAR history. Even though the Chevelle did not finish the race, the psychological damage to the rest of the field was already done. The legend of the Gray Ghost was born. Competitors spent more time worrying about what Smokey was doing than they did working on their own cars. He had managed to get inside their heads, proving that a clever mind could terrify an entire paddock without even winning the race. Now, you might be thinking, how did NASCAR let him get away with this for so long? The truth is, the sport was still in its infancy when it came to technical regulations. The inspectors used crude go-no-go gauges and templates made of wood or thin metal that only checked a few specific points on the car's body. If the curvature matched and the roof height was correct, you were cleared to race. Smokey simply studied where those templates touched the car and left those areas completely stock, while wild modifications were made to the sheet metal just inches away. It was a classic magician's trick. Get them to look at one hand while the other hand does the real work. He proved that engineering was as much about understanding human psychology as it was about mechanics. The Chevelle had failed to win the race, but it had successfully exposed the glaring weaknesses in NASCAR's rulebook, and officials knew they had to make a serious change. NASCAR's reaction to Smokey's Chevelle was swift, calculated, and incredibly brutal. Bill France Jr. and the rest of the governing body realized that if they did not act immediately, their sport would quickly devolve into a showcase of who could build the most extreme, unidentifiable custom car. They were trying to build a major, professional motorsport, and having a rogue mechanic from Daytona Beach expose their entire technical inspection system on a weekly basis was simply not acceptable. So, in 1968, NASCAR introduced an innovation that would forever change the face of stock car racing: the full-body template. This was a massive, heavy metal frame that was literally shaped like a factory stock car. Instead of checking individual points on the body with rulers and gauges, inspectors would now drop this giant steel cage directly over the entire car. If the sheet metal did not line up perfectly with the template, the car was disqualified on the spot. This was a direct, targeted strike against Smokey Yunick. The officials did not even try to hide it. They knew that his tricks relied entirely on making modifications in the spaces between their inspection points. By introducing a system that measured the entire car as a unified shape, they effectively closed those gaps forever. It was like wrapping a present in tight plastic wrap instead of loose paper. Suddenly, every single bump, curve, and modification was completely visible. Now, you might be thinking, did this finally put an end to Smokey's creative compliance? Well, yes and no. It certainly made his life a lot harder. The era of subtly narrowing bodies by an inch or chopping rooflines without getting caught was officially over. But Smokey being Smokey, he did not just give up. He simply shifted his focus to other parts of the car that the templates could not easily measure. He spent hours studying the metal alloy of the template itself, looking for ways to exploit thermal expansion or flexing under load. But the larger impact of the full-body template went far beyond his individual battles with inspectors. It forced NASCAR into the modern technical age. Prior to 1968, stock car racing was still largely a hobbyist sport where local mechanics could build a car in their backyard and compete on equal footing with factory teams. By introducing standardized, high-precision inspection tools, NASCAR set a new baseline for fairness and professional consistency. Here is what most people do not realize. The highly sophisticated laser scanning systems used in NASCAR inspections today, which use millions of dollars of technology to measure cars within millimeters, trace their lineage directly back to that crude steel cage built in 1968 to stop Smokey Yunick. Every time a modern race team complains about their car failing inspection by a hair's breadth, they are experiencing the direct legacy of the best damn garage in town. Look, it is easy to view this as a sad ending to a golden era of racing. There is a certain romanticism to the idea of a lone wolf mechanic outsmarting a major governing body with nothing but his wits and some hand tools. And when NASCAR tightened the rules, they did lose a bit of that Wild West charm. But they also gained the credibility they needed to grow into a multi-billion-dollar national phenomenon. Smokey's war with the inspectors was not just about winning races. It was a necessary catalyst for the evolution of the entire sport. He pushed the boundaries so hard that he forced the rules to become smarter. In a strange, highly ironic way, NASCAR needed Smokey. Without his constant pressure, the technical standards of the sport might have remained primitive for decades. He was the anvil upon which the modern rule book was forged. And yet, the personal toll of this constant warfare was starting to wear on Smokey. The fun was slowly being drained out of the garage. What used to be a clever game of chess was turning into an increasingly hostile, personal conflict. The inspectors were no longer just doing their jobs. They were actively looking for ways to humiliate him, and Smokey was starting to feel the pressure. But before he would walk away from the sport for good, there was still one more massive, legendary showdown left to play. Smokey was not the type of man to slide quietly into retirement. If he was going down, he was going to make sure everyone remembered the name of the man who had given the NASCAR establishment its biggest headache. He was ready to make his final stand, and it would be absolutely unforgettable for everyone. The breaking point came at the 1967 Atlanta 500. Smokey brought his Chevelle back, but the tension in the air was thick. The inspectors were desperate to catch him, and they finally did, citing improperly modified frame rails. Smokey was furious, arguing that the rules did not prohibit his modifications. But NASCAR's decision was final. The car was banned. Legend has it that Smokey, in an act of pure defiance, left the fuel tank on the ground, hopped into the car, fired it up, and drove it straight back to his garage, shouting that they could keep the tank because he did not need it anyway. After that final, dramatic clash, Smokey gradually stepped away from NASCAR. The sport was changing, and there was no longer room for a lone wolf who lived in the gray. Yet, his legacy was permanently locked in. Smokey proved that intellect could triumph over corporate money. Despite his massive impact on the sport, Smokey has never been nominated for the NASCAR Hall of Fame. It is a glaring, controversial omission. Many believe NASCAR still holds a grudge against the man who made them look foolish for decades. But to his family, his fans, and countless mechanics, Smokey does not need a trophy or a plaque to prove his greatness. His book, Power Secrets, remains a holy text for engine builders. What if Smokey had modern tools? What if NASCAR had let him run wild? We will never know. But his spirit still echoes through every garage where people dare to think outside the box. Thank you for riding along with us through this incredible journey of automotive history. This is Paul from Rare Car Stories. Catch you next time. It is incredibly fascinating to look back at this unique era of motorsport, where individual creativity was the ultimate currency of speed. Today, racing has become so tightly controlled by computers, sensors, and simulation software that there is very little room left for the kind of human intuition that Smokey possessed. He represents a bygone era of pure, unfiltered ingenuity. When we look at a modern stock car, we are looking at a machine that has been optimized by algorithms, but when we look at the Gray Ghost, we are looking at the soul of a rebel who refused to be contained by a book of rules. It reminds us that sometimes the most exciting part of racing is not the race itself, but the brilliant minds working behind the scenes to challenge the limits of what is possible. His legacy is a beautiful testament to the power of human intellect, showing that true innovation can never be truly outlawed, and that some legends will always live forever in the minds of car enthusiasts everywhere.